a small plane, 2 people, and a mission that was not only dangerous but today seems impossible. The strange dream of the owner of a hotel in Las Vegas that the airplane has to be kept in the air for months without touching the ground. It was not just a matter of fuel. This is a story of lack of sleep, December's cold, and a delicate balance between life and death. But the question is whether these 2 pilots were able to break this impossible record or their plane disappeared somewhere in the blue sky forever. A strange incident in history that has been lost somewhere in books today. Viewers, in 1956, a man named Warren Bally opened his own hotel in Las Vegas, which was quite different from the other big casinos and hotels in the city, because ordinary villagers used to come here. This hotel called Hacienda was not so expensive, and this was the reason why ordinary people liked to go here. But because the profit was very low, Warren Bally kept thinking of new ideas for the fame of his hotel. One day, an army pilot named Bob Tim advised him that if any world record is broken, it can make Hacienda very famous. His sign was to fly a plane that flew for months without touching the ground. Warren liked this idea, but could he really make this hotel famous or not? And most importantly, how would this be possible? Here it is important to understand that when an aircraft was invented, its flight time was first recorded in seconds. For pilots and mechanics, it was important to know how long a plane could fly in the air. As time passed, the aircraft became more advanced, and their flight time also increased, and there came a time when it came to the fuel tank and stopped. That is, the bigger the fuel tank, the longer the flight time. In 1923, the U.S. Army refueled one plane from the other plane in the air and solved this problem. After that, the first record of endurance flight was immediately broken. The first world record was broken by a DH-4B plane by refueling 9 times in the air and flying continuously for 37 hours. After that, a new series of breaking the world record began. America had a fever of endurance flight, and this record was broken 5 times in 1929. But by the time Bob Tim was giving this idea to Warren, the force of this world record had broken a lot, because now it was not about the limits of the engine or fuel tank of the aircraft, but about testing the physical limits of man. Bob Tim was talking about breaking such a world record that in 1949, 2 Navy pilots built a plane called Aeronca Sedan in the air for 46 days, and their purpose was also highlighted a lot in the media. The owner of Hacienda, Warren Bally, liked this idea a lot to promote his hotel, and he requested Bob Tim to complete this mission, because Bob Tim had finally become a well-known World War II pilot. Tim first went to McCarran Field Airport. From there, he bought a Cessna 172 aircraft and hired a mechanic so that the plane could be modified for endurance flight. First of all, he removed the seat of the co-pilot, because if Tim had to stay in the air for more than a month, he would definitely need a co-pilot. And these 2 pilots will fly the plane in shifts. One pilot will take care of the controls, and the other will sleep on the form pad instead of the co-pilot. He also removed the bench in the back row. Instead, only 8 square feet of storage was made in which important things could be kept. And a small sink was also fitted in a corner of the cabin, so that sometimes a sponge bath could be taken in a cabin 4 feet high. After that, he also installed a 95-gallon belly tank, so that there is an extra fuel tank besides the plane's wings. An electric winch was also installed in this belly tank to fill fuel during the flight, which would be able to pull the fuel pipe up. He removed the co-pilot's door and installed a folding door instead, which would give an easy way to reach the fuel port of the belly tank. In today's era, hanging from a flying plane can only be seen in movies, but in that era, this was commonplace. Until the 1950s, aerial stuntmen did a lot of scenes in which they had to go from one plane to another during the flight. To make refueling as safe as possible, a folding platform was also built outside the co-pilot's door, so that the pipe could be connected to the belly tank's port while standing on it. And this platform was the only place on the plane where you could stand upright. Otherwise, there could only be a place to sit or lie in the Cessna 172. He also made a lot of changes to the plane's engine and wrote Big Hacienda outside the plane, which was the most important purpose of this entire mission. Now it was time to do test flights. In the summer of 1958, test flights began, but problems began to arise one after the other. The first co-pilot Tim hired didn't get along with the other. During test flights, the 2 often disagreed on something or the other. The first test flight failed, the second failed, and in the third, the 2 had such a fight that Tim fired the co-pilot. The problem was in the exhaust valve in the plane's engine, which was heating up again and again. He had launched the mission 3 times, but failed badly. On top of that, when he was doing his failed test flights to make a new world record. At the same time, pilots named Jim Heath and Bill Burkhart had succeeded in making a new world record by staying in the air for 50 days on the same Cessna 172. Tim solved all the problems of the plane by December, and finally on December 4th, 1958, Hacienda took off from McCarran Field for its fourth attempt. At that time, the officials of the International Federation of Automobile, i.e. FAI, were also present there, who were keeping an eye on the mission. To avoid fraud charges, Tim and his new co-pilot John Cook took off and returned to the runway so that a chase car could paint a special white on the tires of the plane. If they tried to land somewhere secretly, this white paint would come off and the world record would not count. After 12 hours, when it was time for refueling for the first time, the two of them came to a paved road where a refueling truck was already present. As soon as the plane came to the straight of the road, the truck driver pressed his full accelerator. At this time, the plane had to fly at its lowest speed, which was 100 kilometers per hour because the truck could not run faster than this. When Hacienda came only 20 feet above the truck and both aligned with each other, the co-pilot took out the winch and threw it down. The workers present in the truck put a pipe on this winch and then pulled the winch up. This pipe was connected to the port of the belly tank and then indicated to the truck that it should turn on the fuel pump. For the next 3 minutes, Hacienda and the truck were right next to each other. During this time, if there was even a small mistake, or if either of them sped up or slowed down, the result was only death. When the belly tank was full, the co-pilot took out the pipe and threw it back down and flew again in the sky for the next 12 hours. If they had to break the 50-day world record, this process would have to be repeated at least 100 times. Tim and Cook kept flying over Las Vegas for a few days, so that if there was any problem in the plane, the landing strip was close. But when everything started to look fine, they started spending a lot of time on the deserted California plains. Fuel efficiency improves at high altitudes, but the temperature also freezes. And because of the modification in the doors of Hacienda, its insulation was no longer good. So to avoid the cold, they decided to fly close to the ground. The views are good at low altitudes, but at night, the mountains and clouds can also be deadly. Now that the two pilots were together, they had a good friendship. Both spent their free time reading books, exercising, and chatting. Twice a day, taking advantage of refueling, they would not only refuel but also pull other necessary things up, such as water containers, engine oil, and food made by the chefs of Hacienda. Here you must also be wondering, where did the food they ate go? That is, where did they do the toilet? They had a folding camp toilet seat in the plane, under which a waste bag was attached. This plastic bag filled with waste was actually emptied on the deserted California plains. He never told this himself, but his wife told him after the death of his co-pilot. Now, Tim and Cook had spent 36 days in the air. They also spent their New Year evening on the plane, but the effects of fatigue and tension began to be seen. They were facing a lot of trouble in a small plane cabin. In the sound of the plane engine, they were not even sleeping properly. One night, it so happened that Tim fell asleep while sitting on the controls, and this was only a few minutes before the co-pilot's shift began. Surprisingly, for the next hour, Tim's eyes did not open, and the plane kept flying straight at the autopilot. When Tim opened his eyes, the plane was flying at a low altitude in a canyon in an unknown place. If Tim's eyes did not open for a few more minutes, the plane would crash into a mountain, because the autopilot's responsibility was only to keep the plane straight, not to avoid obstacles. On January 12th, that is, on day 39, there was a serious problem with the plane. The plane's generator failed, meaning that the radio, lights, heater, and belly tank would not work to pump fuel into the wings. The ground crew sent a small wind turbine up, but it could only generate enough electricity for the radios to run. In the remaining days, the fuel had to be pumped manually by hand. Because there were no lights, the refueling process at night was also very difficult, especially when there was a new moon. They fixed this problem by attaching a flashlight to the winch so that the ground crew could see where to attach the pipe. And another truck was driven 300 feet ahead of the refueling truck, which had a searchlight on it. Now the problem was getting worse day by day. The plane's fuel gauge broke down, the tachometer failed, and the engine began to freeze carbon. As soon as the time came to break the record on January 23rd, Hacienda finally began to get the publicity that the owner of Hacienda Bali wanted. Bali made a schedule for every big city and published it in the newspapers so that people could see the plane and cover this historic moment. Once he sent a whole separate plane full of photographers who flew with Hacienda and took some memorable pictures. To make this moment better, co-pilot Cook also pretended to get out of the plane and clean the windscreen. The newspapers published this picture and the whole country started paying attention to this historic flight. On January 23rd at 3:52 p.m., Hacienda broke the 50-day record, but Tim and Cook decided that they would not land as long as they could, and so they spent another 14 days in the air. Finally, the plane was no longer capable of flying anymore. On February 7, 1959, after staying in the air for 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 5 seconds, they finally asked for permission to land from the control tower of McCarran Field and landed the plane. At the time of landing, the press was packed, and people from all over the country came to the airport to see this historic moment. This included supporters, record officials, journalists, Tim's wife and children, and the entire staff of the Hacienda Hotel. Tim and Cook were in such bad shape that they were not even able to get off the plane. Officials also confirmed that the white tire paint was completely intact, i.e. the plane really stayed in the air for 64 days without landing. In 2015, the FAA officially closed the piloted endurance records because there was an increasing risk of life-threatening damage. This means that Tim and Cook's world record will now be unbreakable forever. Cessna 172, in which this world record was made, is still telling its story to people hanging in the baggage claim area of Terminal 1 at McCarran International Airport. I hope you will like and share this video of InfoZem. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next video.